The wind snapped against the windows like a warning. In the thin mountain air of Leadville, Colorado, winter didn't arrive gently, it descended like a judgment. Sadie Moore stood behind the counter of Moose Tracks Cafe, wiping down the last pie case with slow, tired hands. Her wrists ached from the 12-hour shift, but she wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. Outside, snow piled against the front steps like a wall closing in, and the familiar creak of the wooden beams above her head offered more comfort than her cold, empty apartment ever had. The open sign flickered. Once, then went dark. "That storm's not playing around tonight," Maggie said, as she emerged from the back, her silver-streaked hair pulled up in a bun that had started neat and collapsed somewhere around noon. "You should head out before the roads freeze over." Sadie gave a quiet laugh and leaned her elbows on the counter. "And miss the joy of sleeping in a drafty apartment over a hardware store with pipes that moan like dying cattle." "Hard pass." Maggie rolled her eyes, but her voice softened. "You say that, but one of these days I'll find you frozen to the espresso machine. Then bury me with the tip jar. It's the only inheritance I'll leave behind." They shared a smile, but it was the kind of smile people wear to hide exhaustion. Maggie knew. She always knew. Sadie turned and poured the last of the coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. One for her, one for Maggie. Outside, the sky had turned a soft, silver gray, the kind that warned of something heavier coming. There wasn't a single car moving on the snow-covered street. No surprise. Leadville, at 10,200 feet above sea level, wasn't a place people passed through. You had to mean to get here. You had to know where you were going. And on a night like this, no one should be going anywhere. Sadie walked over to the table by the window, the one with the chipped paint, and the view of the mountains now hidden behind a wall of white. She sat across from Maggie and blew into her mug, letting the heat brush her face. "I used to think snowstorms were romantic," she said softly. Maggie watched her but said nothing. "I'd be in a suite at the W in Aspen watching snow fall like confetti. There'd be candles, champagne, an itinerary full of people I didn't care about, pretending I was someone I never really knew how to be." Maggie leaned forward slightly. "What changed?" Sadie took a sip, letting the bitterness settle on her tongue. "Everything." The cafe's old radiator hissed in the corner, like it was trying to join the conversation. In the distance, a low rumble echoed like a plow, maybe, or a truck caught in something it couldn't escape. "Do you ever regret walking away from it?" Maggie asked gently. Sadie looked up, her eyes catching the reflection of herself in the window, tired. Yes, but clearer than she'd ever been in that penthouse mirror she used to own. "Not for a second. I just—" She paused, blinking back something she didn't want to name. "I didn't think starting over would feel so much like standing still." Before Maggie could answer, the cafe door rattled violently against the wind. Sadie blinked. "Did you lock it?" Maggie nodded, frowning. "Of course I did." Then it rattled again, harder. A gust of snow burst through the small gap at the bottom, and then with one final heave, the door flew open. A man staggered in the wind, howling behind him like it was trying to drag him back. He shoved the door shut with his shoulder and stood panting, covered in a sheen of snow and panic. His coat was tailored. His scarf looked like it cost more than Sadie's car. His shoes, leather Italian, very wet, left tracks on the tile. He stared at them for a moment, breath clouding the air. "Are you open?" he asked. Voice clipped crisp. "New York." "Definitely." Sadie stood slowly, mug still in hand. "No, but I'm guessing this isn't a social visit." The door opened again. Another man, then another. Soon the wind was dragging in more than snow, 15 in total, all dressed for a business retreat, not a blizzard. They looked completely out of place against the old wooden booths and diner smell of bacon and pie. Maggie's eyebrows shot up. "What is this? A board meeting gone rogue?" The first man stepped forward, removing his soaked gloves and shoving them into his coat pocket. We were headed to a private lodge about 20 miles east. GPS said we could beat the storm. GPS lied. "Snow will do that," Sadie replied. "I'm Clint Redford," he said, extending a hand that was firm, but trembling. Redford Capital. Sadie didn't take it. Moose Tracks Cafe. Cash only. No lodges, no fireplaces, no valet. He looked around the room, assessing it the way a man might assess a property before a buyout. "Is there anywhere else in town, not unless you brought snowshoes and a shovel?" Clint sighed and ran a hand through damp, dark hair. "We need shelter, just until the road's clear." Maggie stepped in then, ever the calm center. "We've got blankets and a back room. It's not the Ritz, but it's dry. And we've got coffee." The group murmured their appreciation, awkwardly peeling off coats and scarves. Some looked grateful. Others looked like they were trying very hard not to complain. Sadie motioned to Dee's small blanket fort behind the counter. "My niece is sleeping. Let's keep it quiet." Clint followed her gaze, and his expression shifted just slightly. Less arrogance, more awareness. Understood. As the men spread out, some standing awkwardly, others sinking into booths, like they weren't sure how chairs worked. Sadie moved behind the counter and started filling a carafe. Maggie watched her. 15 billionaires in a snowstorm, she whispered. Sadie poured the coffee slowly, carefully, her hands suddenly very still. "Let's hope they leave the ego at the door." She looked up, her voice steady. "Because in here we all freeze or we all stay warm. No in-between." From across the room, Clint met her eyes, and for just a second, something flickered behind his. Not power, not control. Something else entirely. Recognition. Maybe even regret. Sadie turned away before she could read too much into it. The storm was just getting started. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The last of the frost-covered coats had been draped across the backs of booths. Steam rose from mugs in mismatched hands. And for a moment, Moose Tracks Cafe stood quiet again, like the storm had swallowed all sound but the whisper of breath and the ticking of the old clock above the register. Sadie leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes tracking each man in the room. The tension wasn't hostile, just uncomfortable. These weren't people used to sharing space, let alone cots and coffee with strangers. They looked lost, not directionally, but in the way powerful people get when nothing they know applies anymore. Clint Redford didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the dining area like he didn't trust the floor to hold him. His coat was off now, cashmere-lined, monogrammed, and the suit beneath it was wrinkled at the cuffs, damp from melted snow. The kind of man who measured time in billable hours and strategy decks. Sadie didn't like the way he was watching her, curious, yes, but also like he was trying to figure out how she'd ended up here. The question hung in the air without being asked. "What's a woman like you doing in a place like this?" She looked away and refilled a coffee pot instead. He stepped forward. Sadie right, she didn't answer at first. She didn't have to. There weren't many other women running diners in Leadville at 11 p.m. during a blizzard. He tried again. "Thank you for letting us in." Sadie glanced at him over her shoulder. "Wasn't about letting you in. It was about not letting you freeze." A flicker of something surprise maybe crossed his face. "Still, you didn't have to." "I did." She poured 2 mugs and handed him one. "Because there's not a lot of humanity left in the world if we only help when it's convenient." Clint took the mug fingers, brushing hers briefly. Warmth. Real. Brief. Not many people would see it that way, he said. Not many people get snowed in with 15 billionaires at a roadside cafe. He smiled then. Small, tired. It made him look less like a Wall Street headline and more like a man who hadn't had a real night's sleep in weeks. Behind them, Maggie passed out blankets to the rest of the group. Some of the men muttered thanks. Others avoided eye contact. Sadie watched them shift, one scrolling a dead phone, another wiping his glasses, one quietly pacing near the jukebox that hadn't worked in 3 years. "You all were headed to a retreat," she asked, not because she cared, because tension needed somewhere to go. Clint nodded. Annual off-site, team bonding, vision planning, that kind of thing. She raised a brow. "Vision planning and a blizzard bad call on my part," he admitted. The forecast was clear when we left Denver. Sadie tilted her head. Forecasts lie. Mountains don't. That earned a small chuckle. Duly noted. She sipped her coffee, letting the silence between them settle before asking the question that had been sitting on her tongue since he walked in. "What exactly do you do, Mr. Redford?" He hesitated. "Private equity. Mergers, acquisitions?" Sadie nodded slowly. "So you buy things, fix them up, sell them off, more or less." She let that hang. "So, how do you decide what's worth saving?" Clint looked at her sharply. The question wasn't about companies, and he knew it. "I guess it depends on what you see when you look past the surface," he said. She held his gaze a beat too long, then walked away. In the corner booth, Joan Wallace had kicked off her heels and pulled a flannel blanket over her legs. She watched the interaction like someone filing it away for later. Maggie came up beside Sadie and spoke low. "You always like poking the fire." Sadie shrugged. "Better than pretending it's not there." Maggie's eyes were kind, but her voice had an edge. "Careful. He looks like a man who notices the things people think he misses." "I'm not trying to be noticed. That's usually when it happens." Back at the booth, Clint sat down at last, the weight of exhaustion tugging at his posture. But his eyes were still on Sadie. Watching her pour coffee check the thermostat tuck Dee's blanket higher over her shoulder. She was efficient, quiet, measured. But there was something else. A stillness that suggested history. That kind of silence doesn't come from peace, it comes from rebuilding. "Hey," one of the younger men called from the far end of the cafe. "Is there? Wi-Fi?" Sadie snorted. "Sweetheart, the only thing wireless in here is the jukebox, and it died sometime around the Obama administration." A few people laughed. The ice cracked. Clint leaned back, sipping his coffee. "You've done this before." "What?" she asked. "Manage chaos." Sadie gave a half smile. "It's just people. Hot food, warm place, a little dignity. Most of us need the same 3 things." He studied her. "You didn't flinch when we came through the door. 15 people in expensive coats and entitlement." "I flinch later." There was another pause, but it wasn't awkward. It was curious. Like both were waiting for the other to say something they hadn't decided on yet. Joan shifted in her seat, catching Clint's eye. "You should get some rest," she said not unkindly. "We're not solving strategy tonight. I'll sleep when I stop smelling bacon grease." Sadie smirked. "Don't knock it. That smell's built more comfort than any retreat planner ever could." Clint turned to her. "You talk like someone who's seen both sides." "Maybe I have." She moved past him, clearing mugs, straightening menus that didn't need it. And still he watched her. Maggie dimmed the overhead lights. The glow softened the edges of everything, turned expensive watches into silhouettes, turned fine wool into just cloth, turned billionaires into men, quiet and tired and very human. Sadie moved behind the counter, refilled the carafe again, and finally allowed herself to exhale. She could feel it already. This wasn't going to be just one night, not in the way that mattered. Because storms pass, but the people they bring in, don't always leave the same. Morning came slow. The kind of slow that settled in your bones, wrapped itself in the silence of fresh snow, and made time feel like it had forgotten how to move. Outside the windows, the world was whitewashed. Rooftops bowed under the weight of snowfall, and the sky hung low like it was still deciding whether or not to keep going. Inside Moose Tracks Cafe, the usual hum of life hadn't returned. No regulars, no radio. Just the faint clink of mugs and the occasional creak of a wooden floorboard. It felt suspended, like the whole place had taken a deep breath and hadn't let it out yet. Sadie stood by the stove, watching coffee drip into the pot, thick and slow. Her fingers tapped against the handle, her mind somewhere else. Somewhere far. "You always up this early?" The voice came from behind her, quiet but alert. "Clint Redford." Of course. She didn't turn right away. When the heat kicks off at 4 a.m., it's either get up or become a human popsicle. Clint leaned against the archway between the dining area and the kitchen, still barefoot, wearing socks so white they practically glowed against the cafe's worn tile. He held a mug she hadn't poured. "You find the coffee?" she asked, followed the smell. "I'm not completely useless." Sadie smirked. "There's a t-shirt for that." A pause stretched between them. Not tense. Not yet. Just curious. "I couldn't sleep," Clint said. "Your niece talks in her sleep." "Something about marshmallow dragons." Sadie chuckled under her breath. "Dee has a vivid imagination. She thinks the world should come with subtitles and sparkles." Clint took a sip, then lowered his voice. "She said you used to live in a building taller than the mountains?" Sadie's spine stiffened. "She wasn't lying, was she?" he added. She turned slowly. "You get bored easily, don't you?" Clint raised an eyebrow. "I ask questions. It's what I do." "No, what you do is dig," she said evenly. "And you're used to people handing you their stories like business cards. Is that what you think this is? I think I let 15 strangers into my cafe during a storm, and one of them keeps looking at me like he's solving a puzzle no one asked him to." Clint's jaw tightened, but only slightly. "You talk like you've been on the other side of this before." Sadie turned back to the coffee, poured herself a mug, then leaned against the counter. "Maybe I have." He watched her for a long beat. The flicker in her eyes didn't match the rest of her, didn't match the worn apron or the soft flannel sleeves rolled up to her elbows. There was steel in there. Something built, not inherited. "I'm not here to dig," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to understand why someone like you ended up in a place like this." She looked at him then. Really looked. Because people like me don't always want to be where everyone thinks we belong. She pushed off the counter and walked past him towards the front windows. The snow was still falling, but slower now, like it had grown tired. Clint followed slower. "You know, I thought I was going to hate it here," he admitted. "This whole situation. You don't strike me as the small-town type. I'm not, but—" He stopped himself. "But what?" He looked out the window. "It's quiet, honest. No one here's pretending." Sadie folded her arms. "You say that like it's rare." "It is." He turned toward her again. "I can't remember the last time someone told me no." Sadie raised an eyebrow. "You want me to fix that?" He grinned, the kind that came with surprise. "You might be the first person who's not impressed. Money's never impressed me, people. That's harder." Just then, the door to the back creaked open. Maggie shuffled in, tying her robe tighter, followed by Dee in oversized pajamas and socked feet, holding a beat-up plush dinosaur under one arm. Dee blinked sleepily at the two adults. "Did we win the Snowstorm?" Sadie walked over and scooped her up gently. "Not yet, kiddo. We're in the semifinals." Clint smiled at the exchange. Softened. Dee looked over Sadie's shoulder and whispered, "He's still here." Sadie gave her a look. Manners. Dee yawned. I didn't say it was bad. Maggie rubbed her eyes and took in the quiet scene. Well, if we're all up, might as well make use of the hands. Sadie set Dee down and pointed towards the pantry. Grab the pancake mix, will you? Dee darted off, trailing sleepy energy behind her. Clint turned to Sadie. You cook for all of us, I feed people. It's what I do. She paused, then added, but I'll need help. Think your team knows how to crack eggs? He hesitated. I can't promise quality, but I'll ask. A few minutes later, the cafe kitchen had become an unexpected workshop. Joan was measuring flour. One of the younger guys, Bryce, she thought was burning toast, but smiling through it. Even the guy who'd asked about Wi-Fi the night before had taken to washing dishes like it was a team-building exercise. Sadie moved through it all like a conductor. Calm, clear, unfazed. Clint took it all in quietly. You do this every day? He asked, sidling up beside her as she flipped pancakes. Most days, she said. It's not always this crowded? It works. She glanced at him. What does you? Here. Her hand paused mid-flip. He didn't push. Just let it sit. Sadie finished the last stack and passed him the plate. Make yourself useful. Clint took it, and for once didn't argue. By the time they sat to eat, the room was warmer. Not just from the heat, but the noise, real laughter, the scrape of plates, even the off-key hum of someone trying to remember the words to a song they half knew. Maggie sipped her tea beside Sadie and leaned in close. You realize you've made more connections in the last 12 hours than some people do in years? Sadie sighed. I didn't ask for this. No. But maybe you needed it. Across the room, Clint caught her gaze again. And for the first time since the storm began, Sadie didn't look away. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The snow was still coming down, quiet and endless, wrapping the town in a hush that made everything feel farther away, like the world outside had paused just long enough for something unexpected to bloom. Inside the cafe, the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and something sweeter connection. Plates clinked. Someone laughed, and Dee was showing Joan how to make whipped cream using a mason jar and a little muscle. Clint stood by the front window, arms crossed, watching the snowfall with a distracted gaze. Sadie saw him from the kitchen pass and almost didn't walk over. Almost. She grabbed 2 fresh mugs of coffee and made her way to him, heart-tapping faster than she'd like to admit. Refill, she asked. Clint turned, startled, just enough to show he hadn't been lost in the snow, he'd been lost in thought. Thanks, he said, accepting the mug. I keep waiting to wake up. Feels like I fell asleep in a boardroom and ended up in a Norman Rockwell painting. Sadie leaned against the windowsill beside him. You say that like it's a bad thing. It's not, he said quickly. Then quieter. It's just unfamiliar. She took a sip, letting the heat settle the silence between them. He turned toward her. You ever miss it? Sadie didn't ask what he meant. She knew. Sometimes she admitted. But I miss who I thought I could be more than what I actually had. Clint studied her for a long second. That's not the answer I expected. She smiled, just barely. Good. I've had enough expectations to last me a lifetime. Behind them, Dee shouted something about whipped cream emergencies, and Joan waved her off with a grin. Clint glanced over his shoulder. She's sharp. You raising her on your own? Sadie nodded slowly. Her mom, my sister, passed a few years ago. Car crash. Her dad wasn't built for fatherhood. I'm sorry. She shrugged, but her eyes dimmed. We manage. Clint took a step closer. You're more than managing. This place. These people? You created something out of nothing. That's not small. Sadie looked up at him. You don't know anything about me. Not yet. And there it was. A pause that wasn't awkward. It was electric, unsure, tipping on the edge of something that could matter. The bell above the door jingled sharp and sudden, breaking the spell. One of the younger executives, Matt, maybe stepped in from the porch, brushing snow from his jacket. Service roads still blocked. Snowplows stuck 3 miles out. A ripple moved through the cafe. Conversations quieted. Sadie's hand tightened slightly around her mug. "So we're still trapped?" someone asked from a booth. Matt nodded. "Looks like it." Sadie took a breath. "All right, folks. That means another day of campfire meals and mismatched socks. Welcome to Moose Track's extended stay." The group chuckled, but the tension lingered under the surface like ice beneath fresh snow. Later that afternoon, Sadie found herself alone in the back refolding clean dish towels just to do something with her hands. Maggie stepped in, drying her own hands on her apron. "You okay?" she asked gently. Sadie shook her head. "Something's off. With the guests with me." Maggie crossed her arms. "Talk to me." Sadie looked down at the towel in her hands. "He keeps asking questions. Not rude, not invasive, just looking at me like he sees something I don't want seen." Sadie nodded. "You like him?" Sadie didn't answer. Maggie moved closer. "You can't hide in this place forever, honey. Eventually someone's going to knock on the part of you you've boarded up." Sadie's throat tightened. "What if I don't want them to? Then he'll leave. And you'll stay. Same snow, same quiet, same ache." Sadie swallowed. "I don't want to be anyone's project." Maggie gave a half smile. "Maybe you're not the project. Maybe he is." That night, the cafe turned into something resembling a living room. Someone had started a card game at one table. Joan and Maggie shared stories of traveling through the Midwest in the 80s, sipping tea like old friends. Clint sat beside Dee, helping her fold origami from old receipts. Sadie stood behind the counter watching it all like a movie she didn't remember signing up for. Dee squealed with delight. "He made a frog, it hops." Sadie's chest ached. She turned and went to the back again, trying to find something, anything to busy herself. Behind her, Clint followed. "I said something wrong." Sadie didn't turn. "No. That's the problem." Clint stood in the doorway, unsure. "You're pulling back." "Because this is temporary," she said quietly. "This snow, this moment, In a few days, you'll be back in a penthouse, and I'll still be making coffee for truckers who forget their wallets. You think that's all this is? I think you're used to things going your way. And this is just a blip in your schedule, an inconvenience you're dressing up as insight." Clint took a breath. "You're wrong." She turned then, and the look in her eyes stopped him. "I've spent years hiding in plain sight," she said. "I built a new life because the old one chewed me up. I don't want to be found." He stepped forward, but slowly. "I'm not trying to find you. I'm just trying to see you." The words landed differently, quieter, truer. Sadie's shoulders softened, but her voice still wavered. "You're not staying. Don't pretend like you are." "I'm not pretending," he said. "I just haven't figured out yet if I want to leave." That caught her. Before she could reply, a voice called out from the front. "Hey, Sadie, there's someone filming out here." Sadie blinked. "What?" She rushed forward out into the main room. At the corner booth, Bryce, one of the execs, sat with his phone propped against a syrup bottle, recording Clint helping Dee with another paper animal. "You filming my niece, Sadie," snapped. Bryce held up his hands. "She's adorable. I wasn't doing anything wrong." Sadie walked over, her voice low. "Turn it off." "But the whole thing, this vibe, it's gold. Do you know how this would play online?" I said, "Turn it off." He stopped recording. The room had gone still. Clint stood up slowly, eyes moving between Sadie and Bryce. You should have asked. Sadie's hands shook as she picked up the phone and handed it back to him. You don't get to come in here, eat my food, sleep under my roof, and turn it into content. Bryce's cheeks flushed, nodded, and stepped back. Sadie looked around, her voice rising just enough. This place isn't a story. It's my life. It's Dee's life. And I'm not going to let you turn it into something else just because you're bored or inspired or stuck. She turned and walked straight into the kitchen, heart-pounding, breath tight. Clint didn't follow this time. But the silence he left behind, it said everything, and outside the snow just kept falling. The night pressed in thick and quiet, blanketing Leadville like a secret. Outside, snow curled against the windows in soft waves, muting the world. Inside the cafe, lights were dimmed, the last of the dishes done, and the heat from the oven lingered like a sigh no one wanted to exhale. Sadie sat alone at the corner booth, fingers cradling a chipped mug of lukewarm tea, eyes locked on nothing in particular. The earlier confrontation had drained something from her, something she hadn't realized was still vulnerable. Across the room, Clint leaned against the doorway between the dining area and the kitchen arms, crossed, saying nothing. He'd been there for 10 minutes, just watching her, respectful, distant, but present. Eventually, Sadie spoke without looking up. You can stop hovering. I'm not going to crack. He stepped forward slowly, his footsteps soft against the old wood. I'm not waiting for you to crack. She looked at him, then tired but steady. Then what are you doing? Clint pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, not touching his own cup, trying to understand where I went wrong. Sadie didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between them like a string pulled tight. You didn't, she finally said. Bryce did. But I brought him here, and I let you in. She shrugged, eyes flicking toward the back room where Dee was asleep. It's not about blame, it's about boundaries. Clint nodded. You're right. Her brow lifted slightly. Didn't expect you to agree. I don't think you realize how often I don't. That got a smile. Barely, but it was there. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Sadie, I didn't know he was filming. But I should have been more aware. She stared at him for a long second. Why does it matter to you, really, because... He hesitated, something working behind his eyes. Because I've spent years surrounded by people who only care about the next move, the next dollar, the next headline. And then I came here and I watched a little girl teach grown men how to make paper frogs. I watched you turn a storm into a shelter. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to leave something better than I found it. I just wanted to leave it untouched. Sadie's voice dropped. That's the problem with people like you. You think wanting to be gentle is enough. Clint's expression softened, and his voice dropped to match hers. I don't want to just be gentle. I want to be different. Different takes more than words. I know. They sat like that for a while, 2 cups growing cold between them, 2 people who weren't supposed to fit, starting to. Then from the kitchen, a soft voice broke the moment. Are we still mad, Dee? Sadie turned as her niece walked in her blanket, trailing behind her like a cape, eyes wide and worried. No, sweetheart, Sadie said gently. We're just talking. Dee climbed into Sadie's lap and rested her head on her shoulder. I didn't like when you yelled. I didn't either, Sadie whispered. Clint watched the exchange, and something in his chest tugged deep, unfamiliar. I thought he was your friend, Dee said sleepily. Sadie looked over at Clint. I don't know yet, Dee turned to Clint. Do you want to be Clint? Gave the kind of smile that reaches the eyes. Yeah, I do. Dee yawned. Then don't be weird. Just say sorry and play nice. Sadie let out a soft laugh, brushing Dee's curls from her face. Maybe she should run your meetings. She'd be more efficient, Clint replied. Less passive-aggressive. Maggie appeared a moment later, her robe tied, and her expression amused. We're having tea and therapy now, apparently, Sadie said. Maggie poured herself a cup and joined them, her presence grounding the moment. Feels like the storm's trying to teach us something, she said after a sip. Clint looked at her. And what do you think that is? Maggie's gaze drifted toward the window. That maybe the world's too loud, too fast, too built on the wrong things. And maybe when everything stops, we're forced to see what matters. Sadie watched her, then glanced at Clint. He was still watching her like she held the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask yet. She spoke softly. We used to come up here when we were kids, my sister and I, back when life was just sleepovers and snow angels. Maggie smiled. Your mom loved this town. Sadie nodded. When I lost her, and then Jen, I needed something quiet, something real. Clint's voice was low. And you built it. Sadie looked down. It's small, it's fragile, it's beautiful. Dee had drifted off again in her lap, warm and heavy. Sadie's voice cracked slightly. I'm afraid of what happens when people find it. Clint didn't reach for her hand, didn't push closer. He just stayed in the space with her. I get it, he said. I'm afraid of what happens if I leave. That made her look up. He held her gaze. You think this storm trapped us, but I think it brought us exactly where we needed to be. Sadie didn't reply. Couldn't, she just nodded. Then the cafe settled again, into stillness, into something tender, and outside the snow finally began to slow. Morning crept in quietly, softer than usual, as if the snow itself had exhaled and finally decided to rest. Outside, the storm had calmed. The streets were blanketed in white, smooth and untouched, like a new page waiting to be written. Inside the cafe, the world was beginning to stir. The smell of fresh biscuits filled the air, and the hiss of bacon from the griddle cut through the silence. Maggie stood over the stove, humming low to herself, her rhythm practiced and calm. Sadie was already wiping down Counter's eyes, still puffy from too little sleep and too much thought. The quiet moments before the day truly began had always been her favorite when things felt untouched, not yet tugged at by need or noise. But this morning was different. There were more shoes by the door, more coats draped on chairs, more voices behind the walls of the back room. And somewhere in all of that, the feeling she'd carefully kept at arm's-length control was starting to slip. Someone's up early, Maggie said, nodding toward the corner booth. Sadie turned. Clint was already seated, elbows on the table, fingers curled around a cup of coffee he must have poured himself. His jacket was off sleeves, rolled hair slightly tousled, like he'd slept against something that wasn't meant for comfort. He looked like he belonged, and didn't all at once. Sadie crossed the room slowly, towel still in hand. Help yourself. Did you? Clint looked up, eyes a little more tired, but still holding that quiet steadiness. Didn't want to wake anyone. You didn't, she said, then glanced at the coffee. But that's yesterday's batch. He smiled. Could have fooled me. Still better than what they brew in our office building. Sadie sat across from him without meaning to. You run a company with 3 espresso bars and still can't find a decent cup of coffee. It's all machine-polished nonsense. Looks fancy? Tastes like cardboard? She smirked. You're really not trying to impress me, are you? Clint met her eyes. Not anymore. Sadie leaned back, folding her arms. What's that supposed to mean? It means I stopped trying to figure you out. She tilted her head and started just paying attention. For a second, the air between them warmed, stretched, leaned into something unspoken. But before either could say anything more, the door burst open and Bryce came in, cheeks red from the cold eyes wide. "You guys need to see this," he said, breathless. Sadie stood. "What's going on?" "There are cars. Everywhere." Sadie and Clint exchanged a look before moving to the front window. She pushed the curtain back and froze. Parked along the road, one after another, were dozens of luxury vehicles. Black, silver, navy sleek machines that didn't belong on snowy back roads. Cameras, tripods, people holding phones and pacing with purpose. A small drone buzzed above, capturing the scene. Clint let out a breath. "What the—" Maggie joined them at the window. "You weren't exaggerating." Sadie's voice dropped. "What are they doing here?" Bryce pulled his phone from his pocket and turned it around. "Remember the video I posted last night? You posted it," she said sharply. He held up both hands. "I thought I deleted it. I swear I didn't know it had uploaded. It must have auto-shared to my stories." Sadie's chest tightened. How many people saw it? Bryce's eyes darted. About 2.6 million, and counting." Sadie closed her eyes, a sinking feeling rising fast. "Of course," Sadie Clint said quietly. "I didn't know. I believe you," she said. Then her voice hardened. "But it doesn't change what's happened." Outside, a reporter began walking towards the cafe door. Behind her, 2 camera operators followed. Sadie turned around. "Lock the door." Bryce hesitated. "Shouldn't we— lock?" He moved. Maggie gave her a careful look. "What now?" Sadie took a breath and tried to still the tremble in her fingers. "We ride it out." Dee came out from the back, rubbing her eyes. "Why are there so many cars?" Sadie crouched down and brushed a curl from her niece's cheek. "Some people saw the video from last night. They're curious." Dee frowned. "Are they mad?" Sadie shook her head. "No, sweet girl, just nosy." Clint stepped closer, voice low. "I can get them to leave. I'll make some calls. Have them clear out." Sadie looked up at him. "This isn't your mess to fix. Maybe not. But I want to help." She studied him for a moment, torn. Then softer. "I don't want to become someone else's headline." "You won't," he said. "Not if I can help it." Sadie stood and looked around the cafe, her cafe. The space that had carried her through loss, through fear, through the slow rebuilding of a life she never thought she'd want. And now it was becoming something she couldn't control. Behind her, Joan spoke from a nearby table. "They're here because they saw something good, something real." Sadie turned. "That's not what they'll write about." "Maybe not," Joan said, "but some of them will remember." And that's something. The camera crew reached the door, a soft knock. Then another. Sadie didn't move. Clint touched her arm, gentle grounding. "You don't have to open it." Sadie looked down at Dee, who was now sitting on the floor, playing with her paper frogs. Then at Clint, then at Maggie standing with folded arms and that steady calm that had anchored her for years. And finally herself, reflected in the glass. She didn't see a victim, or a spectacle. She saw someone who'd survived, someone who'd built something worth noticing, even if it came with a storm. She exhaled slowly. "If I don't tell my story, someone else will. And they'll get it wrong." Clint nodded. "Then let's get it right." Sadie stepped to the door. Hand on the lock. A pause. Then the click. The world waited on the other side. Cameras, questions, curiosity. But so did her voice, and this time she wasn't hiding. The door creaked open, and the cold met her first sharp and thin, like a warning. Sadie stepped outside, slowly blinking against the brightness of morning light reflecting off clean snow. The world she walked into was nothing like the one she'd known the night before. A long row of high-end cars stretched down Main Street, the gleam of luxury brands lining up like a showroom parade. Bentleys, Ferraris, McLarens, names that didn't belong in a town, with 2 traffic lights and a snowplow that broke down every other week. Microphones, boom poles, reporters bundled in tailored coats, crew members shuffling people holding lattes, and lighting reflectors like they were on the set of a movie. Sadie stood on the cafe steps, the scent of coffee still clinging to her sweater, the echo of her breath fogging up in the air. All of it aimed at her. A woman stepped forward, tall, camera, ready, her smile, glossy and practiced. "Sadie Moore," she asked, already knowing the answer. Sadie nodded once. "Amber Langley, Morning Scope News. We'd love a moment with you if that's all right." Sadie didn't move. Inside, through the glass, she could see Dee watching from the counter, her small face barely above the ledge. Clint was behind her, tense, but still. Waiting. Amber continued. "We saw the video. The world did. You opened your doors to 15 stranded executives during the worst snowstorm in a decade, and you fed them, gave them warmth, family. People want to know who you are." Sadie's voice came quiet but clear. Why? Amber blinked. "Because it's a good story." Sadie stepped down off the last stair. Or because it makes a good headline. The camera shifted to follow her. She stopped a few feet away, surrounded but not overwhelmed. "I didn't ask for attention," she said. "I wasn't performing. I was doing what my mother taught me to do, what my sister lived by. You take care of people, you show up. Not because there's a camera rolling, but because someone needs you to." Amber gave a tight smile, trying to steer the moment. "That's exactly what people want to hear. It's inspiring. You've become a symbol." Sadie shook her head. "No. I'm a woman who pays her bills late some months, who tucks her niece in with stories about dragons because her sister should have been the one doing it. I run a cafe in a town that most GPS apps forget exists. And until 2 days ago, the only thing I was known for was cinnamon rolls and good coffee." There was a shift in the crowd. People were listening now, not as press, not as professionals, but as people. Amber cleared her throat. "There are over 130 luxury vehicles out here this morning, many of them owned by CEOs and investors who traveled overnight to meet you after that video went viral. Some say they want to offer you funding, business opportunities, brand deals." Sadie blinked. "You're telling me people drove through a snowstorm to pitch me cafe endorsements or partnerships," Amber said. "There's buzz around your story, around you. You could turn this into something much, much bigger." Sadie paused. Her heart was racing now, but her voice stayed level. "Isn't that the problem? That everything has to be bigger to matter?" No one spoke. She looked over the rows of cars at the people holding their breath to see what she'd do next. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back inside. The door shut behind her with a soft click, muffling the outside world. Clint met her at the counter. "You okay?" She let out a breath. "Not sure." Dee ran over and hugged her waist. Sadie bent down, pulled her in close, rested her chin on top of her head. "They said you're famous now," Dee whispered. Sadie chuckled. "Let's hope not for long." Clint leaned on the counter, watching her closely. "What if they're right about what you could take this moment and build something bigger? Expand the cafe? Use the exposure? Turn this into a platform?" Sadie stood up, expression unreadable, "and be what some polished version of myself that fits neatly into a headline. No thanks." Clint held her gaze. "But what if being seen doesn't have to mean changing who you are?" She didn't answer. Instead, she moved into the kitchen and started prepping biscuits. Maggie joined her quietly, pulling on her apron. "I saw the circus," Maggie said. Sadie didn't look up. "I didn't let them in." Maggie placed a hand on her arm. "But they showed up anyway. because what you did meant something. Sadie stopped, kneading. And now what they go home, write a piece, and I become a story people scroll past in between their coffee and commute? Maybe. Or maybe one of them stays. Sadie turned to her. You think Clint's staying? I think he's not rushing to leave. The timer dinged. Sadie wiped her hands on a towel and walked back out front. Clint hadn't moved. Dee was now showing him how to fold paper stars. Sadie approached slowly. You really think I should say yes to them? He met her eyes. I think you should say yes to yourself. What does that mean? It means don't hide just because it's easier. Don't shrink just because the world suddenly got loud. Sadie sat beside him. You talk like someone who figured it out already. I talk like someone who spent too many years performing for the wrong reasons. She studied him. And now I just want something real. They sat like that for a while, not speaking, just existing, just breathing in the space they hadn't expected but maybe needed. Outside, the crowd started to thin. Reporters filed their pieces. Influencers captured their footage. Some cars began to leave, others stayed. Joan passed by and winked. You're trending Sadie Moore, number 4 on the national list. Sadie groaned. Great. Clint laughed. It's not so bad, it's insane. True, but maybe it's also the beginning. She looked over at him, of what he smiled. Whatever you want it to be. The bell above the door chimed again, not media this time. A group of locals had come in, shaking off the cold, curious eyes darting to the window, then to Sadie. One of them, Mr. Polk, took off his hat and grinned. Heard the whole country's talking about you. Figured we ought to get in line for a cinnamon roll before they become collector's items. Sadie laughed, the tension finally starting to melt from her shoulders. Well, she said, reaching for the coffee pot, at least someone still wants breakfast. And just like that, Moose Track's cafe was full again. Of stories, of people, of something real. By the next morning, most of the media had packed up and disappeared like they were never there to begin with. The snow had been plowed just enough for the slick black sedans to make their way out of town, and Leadville slowly began to look like Leadville again. Quiet, slow, tucked under a thick blanket of winter. But the cafe hadn't gone back to normal. Not entirely. A few curious strangers still came by, phones in hand, looking around like they were stepping onto the set of something bigger than reality. Sadie smiled politely, poured their coffee, answered their questions with vague, careful warmth. But the walls had gone up again. Quietly. Inside her, she could feel it. And Clint noticed. He always noticed. He watched her from the counter as she filled sugar caddies and wiped down menus that didn't need wiping. She hadn't looked at him much that morning, not since he'd offered to call in a favor, and set up a brand deal that would have put Moose Track's cafe on the national map. She'd simply said, "Let me think," and hadn't said another word about it since. Now, as the cafe thinned out after the morning rush, Clint took off his jacket and stepped behind the counter, standing close enough that Sadie could feel the quiet warmth of his presence. "You're mad at me," he said gently. "No," she replied, stacking plates. "I'm sorting. That's just a fancier word for stewing." She finally looked up at him. "You ever think that maybe I don't want more? I think you want the right kind of more. Not the flashy, soul-sucking kind." Sadie's hand stopped moving. She looked at him. Really looked. "You say that like you know the difference?" Clint gave a slow, careful smile. "I've lived both." There was a pause before Sadie spoke. "Why did you really come on that retreat?" He blinked. "What do you mean you're not the corporate team-building type, Clint? You've got your own orbit. You don't play along unless there's a reason." He exhaled, leaning back against the counter. "My board thinks I'm disconnected, that I've built something too big to care about people anymore." So I said yes to a bonding retreat in the middle of nowhere because I thought it'd prove I was still reachable. And I ended up trapped in a snowstorm sharing cold biscuits with strangers and watching a woman run a cafe like she was commanding a warship, and I liked it, all of it. Sadie raised an eyebrow. Even the paper frogs, especially the paper frogs. She smiled, despite herself. So now what? Clint stepped a little closer, his voice low. That depends. Are you going to let the storm be the end of the story, or the beginning of a better one? Sadie swallowed. You make it sound so simple. It's not. But it's worth it. She hesitated, heart thudding a little harder. If I say yes to any of this, what happens when you leave? I haven't made that decision yet. Her voice was quiet now. Don't say things just to make me feel better. I wouldn't do that to you. He paused. I haven't met anyone in a long time who makes me think twice about the way I've been living. You do. Before Sadie could answer, the back door swung open and Maggie stepped into the kitchen holding an envelope. This came in the mail, she said, handing it to Sadie. Handwritten. No return address. Sadie took it, fingers brushing the thick cream-colored paper. She slid it open slowly and unfolded the note inside. Her eyes scanned the page twice. Then again. What is it? Clint asked. Sadie didn't speak right away. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She finally whispered, It's from Edward Lang. Clint frowned. As in Lang Enterprises? Sadie nodded slowly, still staring at the letter. He was one of the men in the group that night. Quiet. I barely spoke to him. Clint stepped beside her and gently took the letter. As he read, his brows lifted. It was brief. A note of gratitude. Acknowledgement. And then one unexpected line at the end. If you're ever ready to expand, I believe the world could use 1,000 more places just like yours. You name the city, I'll fund the first 3. Clint folded the letter carefully. That's absurd, Sadie said, pacing now. What does that even mean? 3 cafes, I can barely keep this one running when the fryer's on the fritz. But think about it, Clint said. You wouldn't have to sell out. You'd get to shape it, keep the soul of it, but offer it to more people. She turned to him, eyes wide. You sound like one of them. I sound like someone who believes in what you've created. Silence again. Maggie cleared her throat. You don't have to decide today, Sadie. But maybe don't say no out of fear. I'm not afraid, Sadie said quickly. Maggie just gave her that look. The one that said, yes, you are, but I love you anyway. Sadie pressed a hand to her forehead. I need air. She slipped out the front, stepping into the crisp, late-morning sunlight. The snow had started to melt along the edges of the sidewalk, leaving wet patches that shimmered. The street was mostly quiet again, save for the occasional crunch of boots or the distant bark of a dog. Sadie sat on the steps, elbows on her knees, watching her breath curl in front of her face. A minute later, Clint sat beside her, wordless. She didn't stop him. For a long while they just sat, no talking, no performing, just quiet. Then Clint said barely above a whisper, You don't have to do it all, but you don't have to stay small either. Sadie didn't answer, but for once she didn't feel so alone in the in-between. The snow was melting in uneven patches along the sidewalks, dripping from roofs, sliding off porch awnings like winter finally exhaling. By afternoon the air had turned crisp, but not biting, and the town had returned to its old rhythm, a slow, familiar heartbeat. Inside Moose Track's cafe, the bell above the door jingled softly, and Joan stepped in with a newspaper tucked under her arm and a fresh bouquet of grocery store tulips in her hand. Sadie looked up from the counter, blinking herself out of thoughts she hadn't meant to sink into. Those for me, she asked. Joan set the flowers on the counter. They were about to toss them at the market. I figured the petals still had something left to say. Sadie smiled gently, taking the bouquet. They're perfect. Joan slid onto a stool and unfolded the paper. You made the front page. Again. Sadie froze. What now? Joan tapped the page. Lang Enterprises. Official press release. They confirmed the letter, called you a model of hospitality, heart, and resilience. Sadie gave a soft sigh and leaned against the back counter. They make it sound so poetic. Well, Joan said, squinting over the rim of her glasses, you're not exactly a poem, but you've got rhythm. Before Sadie could respond, the kitchen door pushed open, and Clint stepped in holding a clipboard and a hopeful smile. You have a minute. Sadie glanced at Joan, who gave a knowing look, and returned to her paper without a word. Clint motioned toward the back hallway, and Sadie followed, wiping her hands on a dish towel. In the small office, a room barely big enough for 2 people, and a filing cabinet that refused to shut all the way. Clint set the clipboard down and stepped back. I know you're not ready to decide anything yet, he said, but I couldn't stop thinking about what you said yesterday. She crossed her arms. About not wanting more, about not wanting their version of more. He flipped the clipboard around. So I made a list. Sadie blinked. A list of what it would take to expand. But on your terms? Community-owned? Woman-led? Staffed by people who actually need second chances? You'd keep the name, the soul. Everything that makes this place what it is. She didn't touch the clipboard. He stepped closer. You wouldn't lose control. You'd shape it. You'd teach it. And you'd get to decide who you bring along for the ride. Sadie stared at the paper, not reading it, just absorbing the shape of what he was offering. I'm not a brand, she said softly. I know. I'm not polished. I'm barely even consistent. Clint smiled. You're real. That's rarer than any of the things on that list. Sadie shook her head and looked away. You don't understand what you're asking. I'm not asking, he said. I'm offering. Silence settled again. She finally whispered, What if I can't hold it all? What if I drop it? Clint's voice softened. Then we build it in a way that lets you set something down without everything else falling apart. Sadie looked at him. Really looked. The way his jaw stayed loose when he was being patient. The way he didn't fill silence, just to fill it. The way his eyes held space for her, not pressure. She took the clipboard, holding it like it might burn. Then a knock came at the doorframe. Maggie leaned in. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a guy up front asking for you. Says he's from Summit Hospitality Group. Clint straightened. That's one of Lang's competitors. Sadie set the clipboard down her chest, tightening. Of course it is. Do you want me to talk to him? No, Sadie said, brushing past them. I'll handle it. Out in the cafe, a man in a sleek gray coat stood by the pastry case, eyeing the cinnamon rolls like they were art. Sadie walked up to him, wiping her hands on her apron. Can I help you? He turned smile crisp and professional. Sadie Moore. Yes, I'm David Knox. I represent Summit Hospitality. I've heard remarkable things about you. She raised a brow. Let me guess. You want to open a string of cafes in airports and call it the Moose Experience. His smile didn't falter. Actually, we're more interested in strategic partnership, investment, our reach, your authenticity. Right, she said flatly. He pulled a card from his coat pocket and handed it to her. I'd love to schedule a proper meeting. We believe your story has serious legs, human humble, marketable. Sadie looked at the card, then him. It's not a story. It's my life. He gave a light chuckle. Of course. But life is made of stories, isn't it? She didn't answer. David nodded toward the bouquet on the counter. You're going to get a lot more flowers, a lot more attention. Just be sure you're the one choosing the narrative. With that, he tipped his head and left the bell jingling behind him like punctuation. Clint walked up beside her a moment later. "You okay? I don't know," she said quietly. Joan folded her paper. "You're being hunted now, honey, by charm and expensive shoes." Sadie looked at the card again. Then back at the clipboard Clint had left on the counter. "I don't want to be bought," she whispered. "You won't be," Clint said. "But you get to choose who you let in." Maggie poured her a fresh cup of coffee. "Just don't lose sight of the kitchen while they're all waving spotlights in your eyes." Sadie took the mug, her fingers curling around it like it could steady her. Outside, more snow had melted, more sun had crept in. And something else, too. Something beginning. Something terrifying and maybe, just maybe worth it. The wind had shifted. It wasn't sharp or stormy anymore, just cool and restless, like it was waiting for Sadie to decide something before it settled. Spring felt near, not quite here, but close enough that the air held a kind of quiet anticipation. Inside the cafe, things looked normal. Sort of. The smell of cinnamon rolls still drifted from the kitchen. Mugs clinked laughter, bounced gently off the old wooden beams, and Dee's paper creations now filled an entire window display, frogs, stars, hearts, even a tiny moose with antlers too big for its head. But under it all, there was a hum, a shift in the ground beneath her feet. Not bad, not good, just different. Sadie stood behind the counter pouring coffee into a to-go cup, pretending not to notice Clint watching her from across the room. He hadn't said much since the clipboard. Since David Knox. Since she'd told Joan, "I need space to think," and Joan had replied with a dry, "Just don't think yourself into a hole." Now Clint approached, mug in hand, tapping the rim gently on the counter like a knock without sound. She glanced up. "Walk?" he asked. She nodded. 5 minutes later, they were moving side by side down the sidewalk, boots crunching against leftover ice. The town was quieter now. The media had truly gone. A few regulars waved from shop windows, but no one stopped them. That was the beauty of Leadville. It remembered how to leave people alone when they needed it. Clint shoved his hands in his coat pockets. "I feel like I've said too much and not enough all at once." Sadie looked ahead. "It's a skill, really." He smiled a little. "I meant it, everything I said. But I also know I've been part of the noise." "You have," she said, not harshly. "But you're not the kind I need to shut out." They walked a few more steps in silence. Sadie slowed near the old train tracks at the edge of town, where the snow had thinned to reveal rusted rails and gravel soaked in memory. She turned to face him. "I keep thinking about what you said," she began. "About not shrinking. About building something that still feels like me." He nodded, eyes steady on hers. "I want to say yes," she said quietly. "But I'm scared that I'll look up one day and not recognize any of it. Not this place, not myself." Clint stepped closer. "Then we build it slow. We protect the parts that matter." Her voice cracked. "And if you leave," he didn't flinch, "then I make sure what we start doesn't rely on me to survive." "But I don't want it to just survive," she whispered. "I want it to feel right, like home." "I don't think I've ever wanted anything more," Clint said, than to help someone build something that feels like home. They stood there, the space between them small now, and for the first time in days the noise stopped. No reporters, no offers, no headlines, just two people, real, flawed, maybe a little broken, but choosing step by step to be in this moment together. Then Clint's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and frowned. Sadie caught the shift in his eyes. "What is it?" Clint hesitated. "Lang's board wants me back in New York. They're calling an emergency session. Something about the company direction." Sadie's heart clenched. "How long would you be gone? I don't know. A few days, maybe longer. She nodded too quickly. Of course, you have to go. Clint reached for her hand. I don't want to go. But you will. Sadie. She stepped back just slightly enough to make the space between them feel colder. You belong to that world, Clint. That boardroom, those people, those expectations. It's who you've been for a long time. His voice dropped. And what if I don't want to be him anymore? She looked at him, eyes wet. Then you better be sure. Because I've had too many people say they're staying only to leave the second something shinier pulls them away. Clint looked down, hands tightening at his sides. Sadie stepped in gently, her voice soft. Go. Handle what you need to. But if you come back, don't come as a guest. He lifted his gaze. Come as someone who's choosing this. Me. Us. Whatever this becomes. Clint reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering at her cheek. I will, he whispered. I promise. Then he leaned in and kissed her forehead, soft, steady grounding. And she closed her eyes, letting the moment imprint itself. He pulled away, reluctant, and started walking down the path toward the inn to pack his things. Sadie stood at the edge of the tracks, arms folded across her chest, heart heavier than she wanted to admit. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if promises made under snow and cinnamon and quiet moments would survive the sharp light of real life. But she knew who she was now, and that mattered more than anything. Back in the cafe, Maggie was clearing tables and Dee was drawing new paper creatures at the corner booth. Sadie opened the door, letting warmth flood over her like an old song. Joan looked up from her seat near the window. So, are we saying yes to the future? Sadie didn't smile. Not yet. But she whispered, we're thinking about it. And for now, that was enough. It had been 5 days since Clint left. 5 slow, uncertain days. Sadie hadn't heard from him since the morning he boarded the plane. No calls, no texts. Just silence stretched too long to feel innocent. Too empty to explain away with meetings or spotty signal. She'd told herself not to expect anything. Not to hope. But every time the door chimed, her chest tightened. And every time it wasn't him, she'd blink, exhale, and fold back into herself. Maggie noticed. Joan noticed. Even Dee had noticed her drawings of paper stars now sat untouched in the corner, replaced by quieter projects like puzzles, and reading aloud to the cat that didn't really belong to anyone. Sadie pretended not to feel the weight of it all. She poured coffee. She ran payroll. She taught 2 teenagers from the community center how to flip pancakes without burning them. But the days felt muffled, and the nights silent, heavy, long. On the 6th morning, an envelope slid through the mail slot. Not a thick, promising kind of envelope. A thin, formal one. The kind that always came folded too neatly. Sadie stared at it for several minutes before picking it up. It was from Lang Enterprises. Inside a single page. Clint had formally resigned from the board, effective immediately. Her breath caught. Not in a good way, not in a cinematic love story way. There was no note, no message, just facts, just absence. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, letter in hand, sunlight pouring across the tiles like nothing had changed. But something had. Maggie stepped in from the back hallway, arms crossed, reading her like a book. What is it? Sadie held up the paper. Maggie read it, then read her, and said nothing. Because what could she say? Sadie moved to the back steps of the cafe. The ones no one used. The quiet steps where she used to sit with her sister sipping dollar store lemonade and dreaming of the life they'd build. Now she sat alone, letter folded tight in her fist, and whispered to the wind, "Why would you do that without telling me?" The answer didn't come. Inside the cafe ran without her. That was the part no one warned you about. When you built something solid, eventually it could stand without you. By afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up. Sadie stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel. We didn't order anything, she called. The driver smiled. Special delivery. Says right here, Moose Tracks Cafe, attention Sadie Moore. He unloaded 3 crates, handcrafted signage, polished wood, black and copper accents, new menus, mock-ups for a second location. No note. Just another silent move in a game she hadn't agreed to play. That night when the cafe was closed and Dee was asleep upstairs, Sadie walked alone to the edge of the frozen lake near the old mill. The moon cast silver across the water, and the quiet wrapped around her like a weighted blanket. She sat on a cold bench, arms wrapped tight around herself. She didn't cry, but the ache in her chest felt sharp enough to be a question. Behind her boots crunched over the snow. She didn't turn. Not until she heard his voice. I wanted to come back with a plan, with something good, something real to offer. She stood slowly, heart lurching. Clint stood a few feet away. His coat was dusted with snow, his face unshaven, his eyes tired. She stared. You left without a word. I didn't want to make promises I couldn't keep, so you just disappeared. I thought I needed time to figure it out, to walk away from who I was. And now, her voice was soft, broken around the edges. Did you figure it out? He stepped closer. I figured out that I was never trying to build a business with you, Sadie. I was trying to build a life. Silence stretched. He held out a folded piece of paper. Not a business proposal, not a contract, a letter, handwritten, creased from being carried too long in a coat pocket. She took it, but didn't open it. I'm not asking for anything, Clint said. Not today. Not tomorrow. I just need you to know I didn't walk away from you. I walked toward the version of me that could actually deserve this. Sadie's hands trembled, and this time the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet, human tears. She didn't speak, but she didn't walk away either. She stood there with him under the moonlight, the lake frozen behind them, the future somewhere out of sight, but not out of reach. And for the first time in 6 days, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of something waiting. The next morning, the cafe smelled like cinnamon and thawing hope. Sadie had barely slept, but for the first time in days, the weight in her chest had shifted. Not gone, not solved, but different. Like grief that had started to give way to possibility. She stood behind the counter, sleeves, rolled up hair, pulled back loosely, her apron dusted with flour. Dee sat in the corner booth, quietly sketching moose-shaped cookies on a napkin, while Joan rearranged the pastry case with her usual frown of concentration. It felt ordinary again, but nothing was the same. The letter Clint had handed her last night still sat folded in her coat pocket. She hadn't opened it not because she didn't want to read it, but because some part of her wasn't ready to hear the words out loud. What she did know was this: he had shown up. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but honestly. And that mattered more than all the polished plans and press releases in the world. The bell over the door chimed. Sadie looked up, half expecting him again. But it was Maggie carrying a box, and an energy that meant she was about to say something she knew might not land softly. Morning, Maggie said, setting the box on the counter. What's that? Maggie raised an eyebrow. It's the start of your second location. Sadie blinked. Excuse me, Clint called me last night, Maggie said. After the lake, said you'd need someone with actual experience to keep this place running while you figure out what the next chapter looks like. Sadie froze. I agreed, with conditions. What conditions that you don't run away from what you're building just because it scares you? Sadie stared at her. I haven't agreed to anything yet. But you will, Maggie said. Because you're not the same person you were a month ago, Joan chimed in from across the room. She's right, you know. That girl I met 2 winters ago wouldn't have let 15 strangers sleep on her cafe floor. Sadie folded her arms. I still don't know what I'm doing. None of us do, Maggie said. We just pretend better as we go. Sadie glanced out the window. Snow still clung to the edges of rooftops, but the sidewalks were clear now. Life was inching forward. So, what's in the box? Maggie opened the lid and pulled out a stack of mock menus. Test designs for the new spot. Clint hired a local firm instead of some glossy corporate giant. Says he wants the new cafe to feel like it grew out of this one, not stamped by some brand team in a tower. Sadie ran her fingers over the paper. Warm beige, simple fonts, a sketch of the mountains behind the cafe logo. Her throat tightened. Then she saw the tagline at the bottom. Come as you are. Stay as long as you need. Her eyes burned. She looked up. He wrote that Maggie nodded. Said it sounded like something you'd say. Sadie swallowed. Hard. I need a minute. She stepped outside, heart-pounding hands shaking with something that felt a lot like the edge of yes. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting gold over the town. Kids were throwing snowballs in the park. Someone was playing guitar on a porch across the street. It wasn't perfect. It was just home. The door creaked behind her. She didn't need to turn. Clint's voice was low. I told you I'd come back as someone choosing this. Sadie faced him. He looked tired. And real. And entirely present. I didn't read the letter, she said. His brows lifted. Why not? I was afraid it would say something I wasn't ready to want. Clint stepped closer. Then let me say it now. She didn't stop him. I love what you've built, he said. Not just the cafe. You. The way you care without asking for anything. The way you make room for people even when you're tired. The way you turned a snowstorm into a sanctuary. Her eyes filled. Clint, I want to build something with you. Not just a business, a life, a rhythm. Something that doesn't depend on headlines or opportunity, but on trust. On choice. Tears slid down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. I can't promise I won't be scared, she whispered. Then we'll be scared together. She laughed through the tears, then shook her head. I don't know what this is going to look like. Me either, he said. But I know what it feels like. They stood in silence, the town breathing around them, the cafe warm behind them, the future pressing softly at their backs. Then Sadie reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the letter, and without looking at it, folded it into his hand. I don't need the words, she said. I believe you now. Clint leaned forward, and this time, she didn't pull away. Their kiss was quiet, warm, rooted. And when they pulled apart, she whispered, Come inside. We've got work to do. And just like that, they turned toward something new together. A week passed, not much changed on the surface. Coffee still poured ovens, still hummed, customers still gathered in their favorite booths. But something underneath had begun to shift. You could feel it in the way Sadie moved. She wasn't rushing anymore. She wasn't bracing herself. She was present. Softer, maybe. Steadier. The second location plans were still just sketches and sample menus, but the idea had started to take shape in her heart. It was no longer something being done to her. It was something she was choosing to build. On her terms. With her people. Clint had stayed. Not in some grand gesture, not with cameras or press releases or grand speeches. He just stayed. Some mornings he helped with inventory. Some days he fixed a squeaky hinge or unclogged the stubborn sink that gave them grief every other Thursday. He didn't take over, he joined in. Quietly, consistently, and that made all the difference. This morning Sadie was elbow-deep in flower-shaping cinnamon rolls with Maggie beside her when the front bell jingled. Joan poked her head into the kitchen. "Sadie, you've got guests." Sadie frowned. "I'm not taking meetings today. They're not here for a meeting. They said they were here for a thank you." Sadie wiped her hands dusted flour off her apron and walked into the front of the cafe. And froze. 3 men were standing by the counter, all familiar, all dressed more casually than the last time she'd seen them, though she could still tell by the cut of their jackets and the calm confidence in their posture that they were the kind of men who made billion-dollar decisions before lunch. She blinked. "What are you doing here?" The tallest of them, Michael, she remembered, stepped forward. "We were in Aspen for a conference. Thought we'd stop by." Sadie raised an eyebrow. "Aspen's 2 hours out. You don't just stop by?" Michael smiled. "Okay. We made a detour. One of the others." Theo chuckled. "We've been following the coverage. The way this place handled all the noise, it stuck with us. You were kind when you didn't have to be the third one," Evan added. "Not just to us, to your staff, to each other. That stays with you." Sadie crossed her arms, unsure. "So this is... what a courtesy visit." Michael glanced around the cafe. "Honestly, a reminder. That not every good thing has to scale. That not every solution has to be efficient. Sometimes it's just about how people feel when they walk through the door." She softened just a little. "Well, we do try to make people feel human. And that's rare," he said. Before she could respond, Evan stepped forward and handed her an envelope. "No strings. We pooled a gift," he said. "Not for a new cafe, not for expansion. For you, for whatever the next right thing is." Sadie stared at it, stunned. Michael stopped her gently. "You've given enough, Sadie. Let someone give back." Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it weighed more than paper and ink. "Thank you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. They nodded, exchanged a few more kind words, and then just as quietly as they arrived, they were gone. Maggie walked up behind her. "Should I ask how much is in there? I'm scared to open it." "Want me to do it?" Sadie laughed. "No, I'll deal with it later." She slid it under the counter and reached for her apron, tie fingers still shaking. That night, after everyone had gone home and the cafe was finally quiet, Sadie and Clint sat at their usual booth, sipping lukewarm tea and watching the world slow down outside. Clint glanced at her. "You ever think about how different your life looked 6 months ago?" "All the time," she said. "Do you regret any of it?" She shook her head. "Even the hard parts taught me something." "What did today teach you?" Sadie thought for a long moment. "That generosity doesn't always come with strings, that sometimes the world is watching even when you think it isn't." Clint reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers, and he asked, "And that maybe it's okay to let people help?" She said, meeting his eyes, "that maybe being strong doesn't mean carrying everything alone." Outside, snow flurried again, soft and slow. Not a storm this time. Just a quiet reminder that some seasons return, but never quite the same way twice. Sadie leaned back in the booth, Clint's hand in hers, and whispered, "I think I'm ready." For what, she smiled. For the rest of it. The morning sun poured through the cafe windows, scattering warm light across the mismatched tables and chairs that had somehow become iconic in town. It was early, barely 7 a.m., but Sadie was already there, sleeves rolled up, kneading dough with a rhythm that felt like breathwork. Her eyes flicked occasionally toward the door, Not because she was waiting for anyone in particular, though maybe a little part of her always was, but because this morning mattered. Today they were announcing the second location. Not with a press conference, not with a headline, but with a handwritten note on the chalkboard out front, and an invite-only dinner that night for the people who had helped build Moose Tracks Cafe from the inside out. Sadie looked up as Maggie stepped in, cheeks flushed from the cold hair pulled back in a bun that had definitely been redone in the car mirror. "It's real," Maggie said, setting down her keys and taking in the space like she was seeing it for the first time. "We're really doing it." Sadie nodded, wiping her hands on a towel. "Yeah, we are. Clint's been at the new space since dawn. Said he wanted to surprise you with something." Sadie raised an eyebrow. "Should I be nervous?" "Probably," Maggie said, grinning. He had that determined look men get when they think they've had a brilliant idea at 5 a.m. Sadie laughed softly, but there was a flutter in her chest she couldn't quite shake. Not nervousness, just anticipation. Like standing on the edge of something good. The bell above the door jingled again, and Dee wandered in with a stack of new drawings, this time of coffee cups, with wings flying over snow-covered rooftops. "I thought the new cafe could have a mural," she said quietly, sliding the papers across the counter. Sadie knelt beside her. "These are beautiful, Dee." Dee looked down. "Are you going to be at the new place more than here?" Sadie paused, heart-catching. "I'll be at both, but I promise you this will always be home. You'll still see me every day." Dee's face relaxed. "Okay." Later that afternoon, Clint texted her. "Ready? Come alone." Sadie grabbed her coat, told Joan to hold down the fort, and walked the short distance to the new space, an old hardware store they'd leased just off Main Street. It still had creaky floorboards and dust in the corners, but Clint had seen something in it from the start. When she walked in, the lights were low. The front windows had been scrubbed clean, and the floor had been swept. But what took her breath away was what stood in the center of the room. A long wooden table hand-built its surface, still showing the natural grain of the pine. Around it were mismatched chairs, just like at the original cafe, and lining the back wall photos. Dozens of them. Some Sadie had never seen taken by townsfolk visitors, even old newspaper clippings. Each captured a moment, people laughing, crying, hugging, sharing meals, people healing. Clint stepped out from the back room, brushing sawdust off his sleeves. "You did this?" Sadie asked, voice thin with emotion. He nodded. "I thought, if this place is going to carry your name, it should carry your story." She walked slowly around the table, her fingers tracing the edge. There was a photo of Joan teaching a baking class, Dee holding up a paper star, Maggie arguing playfully with the delivery guy. Clint himself mid-laugh, caught by someone with perfect timing. But the center photo was of Sadie, unposed, unaware, pouring coffee for an elderly man, eyes soft hand on his shoulder. She stared at it for a long time. "I didn't know anyone took that," she whispered. "I did," Clint said. "First day I saw you." Before I ever said a word. Her breath hitched. "I thought it was just another cafe," he said. "But you made it feel like church. Like something sacred." She turned to him. "You scare me sometimes," she said, "with how much you see. And you undo me," he said, "with how much you don't see in yourself." They stood there, the silence between them, not awkward, but full. Full of history. Hope. Things unspoken that didn't need to be rushed. Clint reached for her hand. "There's still time to back out." Sadie shook her head. "No, I'm all in." His smile deepened like relief settled in his chest. Outside, snow started to fall again. Not a storm, just a soft curtain of white blessing everything it touched. Sadie looked around the room. The future wasn't shiny. It wasn't loud. It looked like this quiet love handmade tables and a new chapter written in sawdust and risk. And she was ready. The snow had stopped falling by morning. Sunlight touched every rooftop, every tree branch, turning Leadville into something almost unreal, like a town dipped in quiet gold. The sky was pale blue, the kind of blue that only shows up after a storm has passed when everything is still and forgiven. Sadie stood in front of the new cafe keys in hand, her breath fogging in the cold. A small group of people gathered behind her, Clint, Maggie, Joan, Dee, and a few of the regulars who'd been there from the very beginning. She looked over her shoulder at them and smiled, nervous and proud all at once. "You sure you're ready?" Clint asked, his voice low. "No," she said honestly. "But I'm opening the door anyway." The lock clicked. The door creaked. And just like that, it began. They stepped into a space that didn't smell like money or marketing or expectation. It smelled like fresh bread, ground coffee, and warm wood. The lights were soft, the chairs mismatched. A few people walked in, pausing as if they weren't sure they were allowed to be here yet. Then Joan waved them over like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Coffee's hot," she said. "Come on." Sadie moved behind the counter, like she'd done 1,000 times, apron tied tight hands. Steady voice. "Sure." Clint watched her from the far end of the room, his eyes soft with something she couldn't quite name, but felt deep in her bones. Later that afternoon, after the rush had slowed, and the room was filled with a hum of conversation, and the clink of mugs, Clint walked over and leaned on the counter. So he said, "First day. No fires, no lawsuits, no one tripped over the moose sculpture." Sadie grinned. "It's not a moose. It's modern art." Clint smirked. "You've changed." She paused, tilting her head. "Have I, yeah?" he said. "But not the way you think. You're not different. You're just more yourself than ever." Her smile faltered just slightly, but her eyes grew warmer. Took long enough. He leaned in closer, his voice lower now. "You think you would have said yes to any of this 6 months ago?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't think I could have even pictured it." He reached out and brushed his fingers lightly over hers. "Then maybe that's the point. That the best things in life are the ones we couldn't plan?" Sadie looked out across the room. Dee was showing a group of teenagers how to fold paper into tiny birds. Joan was arguing playfully with a customer over pie crusts. Maggie was leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, watching everything with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows she helped build it. And Sadie, she felt full, not with noise, not with stress, just full, settled, at peace. "You know what I was most afraid of," she said, voice soft. "That I'd lose the heart of what made this whole thing matter, that the money or attention would take it away from me, that I'd forget who I was." Clint nodded. "And did you?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "No, I found more of it." A long silence passed between them. Not uncomfortable, just full of everything they didn't need to say. Then Clint pulled a small envelope from his coat pocket. Sadie raised an eyebrow. "More mystery paper?" He laughed. "Not exactly. It's a letter." "From who? From one of the men we sheltered during the storm. He sent it to the foundation we're working with." Sadie opened it slowly, her fingers brushing over the handwriting. "Dear Sadie, you won't remember me, and that's okay. You didn't treat me like someone you needed to remember. You treated me like someone who mattered. I didn't tell you my name. I was afraid to. But the day I slept on your cafe floor and ate soup made by someone who didn't know my net worth was the first day in a long time that I felt human again. I've donated $2 million to fund community cafes across the country. Places where people like me and people not like me can sit down and be reminded that we're all just people. You reminded me of that. Thank you. Sadie read it twice, then a third time. Then she folded it carefully and slipped it into her apron. Clint watched her quietly. You okay? She nodded, barely speaking. It's not about the money. It never was. I know, he said. That's why it worked. Later that evening, as the last customers drifted out and the streetlights flickered on, Sadie stepped outside. The wind had picked up again, cool but not biting, just enough to wake her up. She turned toward Clint, who stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets. Hey, she said. He looked up. You ever think about the day we met all the time? If that storm hadn't happened, none of this would have. Probably not. She stepped closer. Is it crazy that I'm grateful for it? Clint smiled. Not crazy at all. They stood in silence, snowflakes starting to fall again. Not a blizzard, not a threat. Just snow. Gentle and unhurried. Sadie reached for his hand, and this time when he took it, she held on. Not because she needed saving, but because she had built something worth sharing, and because after everything, every late night, every moment of doubt, every stranger who became a friend, she had finally found her way home. Not to a place, to herself. And that was the most extraordinary thing of all.